Kids' morning broke gently over the hills of Montebello, casting long shadows across the terracotta tiles of the Westwood Harrington estate. It was July 4th, and the rest of the world would soon burst into flags, parades, and declarations. But for Lena Westwood, the day began with stillness. She slipped out of bed just as the sky began to shift from ink to amber, careful not to wake her husband, Daniel Harrington, who remained curled under the linen sheets with one arm stretched across her vacant pillow. The baby monitor let out a soft hum, the children still deep in dreams, unaware of the day's symbolic weight. Downstairs, Lena moved barefoot through the open-plan kitchen, the floor cool against her skin. She brewed a cup of lavender tea, inhaling the calming scent before stepping out onto the back patio. The hills were still cloaked in a soft mist, and the only sounds were birdsong and the occasional rustle of leaves in the warm California breeze. There had been a time when July 4th meant packed media events, formal wear, and camera flashes. That life felt like a ghost now distant, and barely real. Her eyes scanned the quiet garden where wind chimes tinkled near the olive trees. Somewhere behind the stillness lay the memories of a different rhythm, one that involved palace gates, polished speeches, and a press that dissected every blink and breath. She hadn't forgotten it. She had simply stopped letting it define her mornings. Inside, Daniel stirred. The groan of floorboards above signaled his waking. He moved slower these days, more deliberate. Not from age, but from experience. His presence was steady, grounding. He eventually appeared in the doorway, hair still mussed from sleep, holding their youngest in one arm. He offered a nod instead of words, letting her moment of solitude linger a few seconds longer. Lena wandered back in, pressing a kiss to their daughter's head before beginning the morning ritual. Oats on the stove, oranges sliced, coffee brewing. Daniel joined silently, brushing past her to scoop fresh berries from the fridge. There was something poetic in the ease of it all, the kind of poetry born not from perfect rhyme but from rhythm, earned through struggle. That morning, something stirred in her. She found herself reaching for her old leather journal, its corners worn, pages thick with old scripts and fading ink. It had traveled with her from studio lots to royal estates, and now to this quiet home in Montebello. She began writing, not for a blog or post or publication, but simply because the words needed to come out. Thoughts about what freedom looked like now. Not grand or loud, but quiet and deeply personal. She looked at the photo Daniel had taken the week before her in denim overalls, sparklers in hand, barefoot with Archie balanced on her hip. It wasn't polished or posed, but it was real. She hadn't meant to share it. But suddenly, the idea didn't seem so impossible. Daniel stood behind Lena in the kitchen, holding the photo in one hand as he rocked baby Nora gently with the other. The image had been sitting in his phone's gallery for days, untouched, unposted, but never quite forgotten. He glanced at it again, Lena standing barefoot in the grass, a sparkler burning bright in her hand, Archie laughing with his arms stretched wide and their golden retriever leaping into the edge of the frame. It had been a fleeting moment, captured without fanfare, the kind of image that wasn't meant to be significant. And yet, it was. Daniel handed her the phone, a quiet gesture more than a suggestion. Lena looked down at the screen, brow furrowing, in thought. It wasn't that she disliked the image, on the contrary, she loved it. But she hesitated in the way one does when standing on a ledge and wondering about the wind. She hadn't posted anything personal in months, not since the last time a simple statement spiraled into a tabloid storm. Every post seemed to come with a price. But there was something about this photo, this one tiny, ordinary fragment of their life, that called to her. She set down her tea and walked toward the living room, pausing by the windows that framed their garden. The memory played back in her mind. That evening had been soft and simple. No stylists, no media teams, no watchers. Just the four of them, laughter echoing as dusk fell, sparklers lighting up little eyes. It had reminded her of childhood, of her mother's backyard, of freedom that had nothing to do with national holidays and everything to do with feeling safe. Daniel watched her from the kitchen, not pushing, just waiting. He had learned long ago that Lena's instincts were sharp but cautious, and he understood better than anyone the toll of vulnerability, especially when it became spectacle. Lena returned to the phone, thumbs hovering over the screen. She cropped nothing, edited nothing, and added a caption that came from the same quiet place the photo had. Then, with a breath she didn't realize she was holding, she tapped post. The notification pinged instantly, then another and another. The world was watching, as it always seemed to be, but this time the gaze felt different. Comments began flooding in, some familiar names, some strangers. Words of warmth, memories shared. People saw something in that image that mirrored their own hopes, their own families, their own quiet revolutions. It was just a woman, a man, and 2 children on a summer evening, but it meant something. As she scrolled through the responses, Lena smiled. It wasn't a grin of validation, but of relief. She had offered something real, and it had been received not with scorn, but with softness. Daniel took the baby upstairs for her nap while Lena remained by the window. Outside, the afternoon sun spilled over the grass. She thought about how something so small, one photo, one post, could unravel years of fear, or maybe begin to. But she also knew the world too well to think it would end here. Still, that night, when she slipped into bed beside Daniel, she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He reached for her hand, and she held it, both of them staring at the ceiling in the dark. Tomorrow they would see what the world had to say. But for tonight they had each other and one unfiltered moment that finally felt like freedom. By morning, the photo had spread far beyond Lena's quiet circle. What had begun as a personal glimpse into family life was now splashed across websites, news feeds, and television segments. Headlines twisted it into something else entirely. Some speculated about secret messages in the photo's composition. Others accused Lena of staging a deliberate slight, and a few went as far as to dissect the children's outfits as symbols of some unspoken narrative. It no longer resembled the peaceful moment it had been. It had become spectacle. Daniel sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through a news aggregator on his tablet, jaw clenched tighter with every headline. One after another, the stories grew more outrageous, each twisting their family's truth into something unrecognizable. He didn't speak. Instead, he set the tablet down, more forcefully than he meant to, the sound echoing across the marble countertop. His shoulders were tense, his breath short. Across the room, Lena watched him, already familiar with the silent cues of his frustration. He pushed back from the counter and walked to the sliding doors that opened onto the patio. The morning sunlight did little to calm him. There was a time when he thought leaving his old life behind would bring safety, normalcy, peace. But now, seeing his children's faces printed alongside words like defiance and statement, the old ache returned. Without a word, Daniel scooped up Nora from her playpen, wrapped her in a light blanket, and slipped on his boots. He needed to move, to breathe. Lena didn't stop him. She knew where he was going, the trail that wound through the hills just behind their home, quiet and shaded, offering enough distance from the noise. The walk helped, but only slightly. He passed familiar trees, rocks, and fences, but his mind was far from the path. He thought of the promises he had made to protect his family, to build something real away from titles and cameras. And yet, no matter how far they moved, the world still followed. He paused near a bend in the trail. The stroller parked beside him and looked out over the rooftops below. Montebello had once felt like refuge. Now it felt temporary, as though even the silence there could be interrupted at any moment. He adjusted Nora's blanket as she slept, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. She had no idea what storm brewed beyond their gates. Back at the house, Lena sat in the living room, a blanket wrapped around her legs, watching a muted news segment that displayed her photo beside sensationalized text. Her phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, others vile. She read none of them. Instead, she stared at the screen, wondering how something so pure had become public property. When Daniel returned, the sun was already beginning its descent. He didn't speak right away. He simply unbuckled Nora, laid her gently in her crib, and sat beside Lena on the couch. His expression had shifted, less anger now, more quiet resolve. The two of them remained there, shoulder to shoulder, as the television played on, its commentary hollow and irrelevant. Whatever the world had to say, it would say it regardless. But inside these walls, they would hold the line. They would hold each other. Evening returned to Montebello, wrapped in soft gold and drifting shadows. The heat of the day had faded, leaving behind the gentle hush that came with twilight. In the backyard, Archie darted barefoot through the grass, chasing fireflies with the carefree laughter only a child could manage. Nearby, Lena sat cross-legged on a woven mat beneath the olive trees, watching him while cradling Nora, who was now fully awake and wide-eyed. It was a moment untouched by cameras or commentary, and Lena let herself breathe in its stillness. Daniel emerged from the house just as the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint crackle of distant fireworks. He held his phone loosely in one hand, not scrolling, just holding. His steps were slower, more deliberate, his jaw now relaxed. He walked toward Lena and sat beside her, brushing a blade of grass from her knee as he did. Archie came running toward them, cheeks flushed, asking something about sparklers. Daniel stood, retrieved the small box from the garden shed, and lit one for him, standing nearby to supervise as their son waved the glowing stick through the dusk. As Lena watched the sparklers trail in the air, she thought back to the post. She had almost deleted it earlier that day. At one point, she even opened the app, thumb hovering over the remove option. But something in her had resisted. That photo and the words she had written hadn't been for the world. They had been for her and for Daniel and for the children who were growing up with both freedom and fire aimed in their direction. Letting others twist it was painful, but erasing it felt worse. Daniel extinguished Archie's sparkler safely in a jar of sand and walked back toward the patio. He placed his phone on the table, opened the Notes app, and began to type. The words came easily, not labored or revised. Once finished, he didn't ask Lena for approval. He simply posted it. There was no photo this time, just text. A simple message that spoke of family, of what mattered most, of moments worth protecting. It wasn't defiant, nor was it passive. It was in every way, Daniel, steady, clear. Final. Lena saw it minutes later as the notification buzzed. She read it once and smiled, not because it was clever or calculated, but because it was true. It said everything that needed saying without inviting anything more. And perhaps that was the point. Not to fight the noise, but to rise above it. Night came quickly after that. The fireflies glowed brighter. The children grew sleepy. Nora was tucked into her crib, and Archie laid between them on the couch, drifting off as Daniel ran a hand gently through his hair. Lena reached for a blanket and covered them both, her movements slow and quiet. The next day, the media said less. Perhaps because there was no image to twist, or perhaps because the world had simply moved on. But in their house, the air felt lighter. They had drawn a line, not loudly, but with purpose. Every year after that, they marked the 4th of July not with pageantry, but with presence. They lit sparklers. They told stories. They stayed home. And every time Lena wrote something. Sometimes she shared it. Sometimes she didn't, but the words always came because now they weren't hiding. They had not retreated. They had reclaimed. Their silence was no longer surrender. It was strength.